You're listening to the B Fox and B Frank show. There was a ton of carnage across college football last week. 4 of the top 8 in the AP poll, all losing. Let's start at the top. Not quite the top, not Alabama, but Georgia. I don't think anyone expected a beatdown quite this bad to happen. We figured LSU would be up for this game playing at home in Death Valley, but I mean, LSU just came out and pretty much completely dominated Georgia from start to finish.
It was a stunner. I was at a family party and there were Illinois fans at the party, and we'll just say that they controlled the remote and I didn't want to fight with anyone. So I had to watch 3/4 of Illinois Purdue, which was just disastrous. Yeah, tons of fun. The Illini looked great in their blowout loss. And then got to see the end of the Notre Dame game, and then I saw parts of the Georgia game, and I was just stunned. Absolutely stunned when I saw what was going on. I don't know what to say. I mean, this was Georgia's absolute worst game they could have played. Joe Burrow was decent. He still hasn't played a good game yet. He's played a decent game. They did it on the ground. I mean, Brissett and Edwards were really good. Even Burrow had a couple rushing touchdowns. Like he showed off the versatility that we hadn't really seen. And the defense, they forced 3 turnovers. That's going to win you games. And they did what I thought that Georgia would do early, and that's, bend but don't break and end up forcing a big turnover. And then from there it was off. I mean, 20-point win. I don't think there's any world in which I could have seen LSU or thought that LSU was 20 points better than Georgia on any day. And of course, it just happens this Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, it was certainly not an aesthetically pleasing game from a modern football perspective. Joe Burrow only completed 50% of his passes, and he was still the more efficient of the 2 quarterbacks. But he, like you said, he did much more damage on the ground. LSU as a whole did, and LSU's defense really came to play as well. 4 turnovers, and I think the bigger stat was locking down Georgia's very, very talented and diverse group of running backs, under 4 yards a carry, which is very, very difficult to do. To, of course, say nothing of what they were able to do against Jake Fromm. Only 16 out of 34, 2 interceptions. Very impressive defensive performance. And I think more than anything, this really speaks to how difficult it is to make it through the SEC gauntlet. And I mean, underscores how impressive it is that Alabama seems to do it every single year.
Yeah, and we were sitting here talking last week about how, LSU loses a heartbreaker to Florida, and you've got just this hell coming down the hill here. You got to play Georgia. It's at home, but you still got to play Georgia. You got Mississippi State the following week, and I believe Alabama's on the other side of them. Like, that's just another day in the SEC West, and it's absolutely insane how these teams come out, specifically Alabama, and just make it happen. It's not the most surprising thing when you see, so many teams in the conference ranked, because you get so many chances to play good teams, but being able to come in week and week out and beat these teams. I mean, LSU has arguably the best resume of any team at this point in the country. They have 3 top 10 wins.
Yeah, for sure. And out of the playoff contenders at this point, they've got far and away the best strength of schedule. But from Georgia's perspective, this is a really big missed opportunity, especially being from the SEC East. This was their marquee regular season game, essentially, because as good as Kentucky and Florida have looked in recent weeks, that's still not going to be quite as big from a national perspective as this game was. Now those will become very interesting in the SEC East race, but in effect, this eliminates the possibility of 2 teams from the SEC making the playoff for the most part. I think there's still a 2% chance, if Georgia runs the table, beats Alabama in the SEC championship game, and that's Bama's only loss. I would be shocked if the committee knocked Bama out of the playoff for that. But it is not as cut and dried as we previously thought it to be.
Absolutely. And I mean, Georgia gets a bye, which is probably the best thing that could happen because they really need a reset after this one. And then they get Florida and Kentucky, their two biggest games in back-to-back weeks. They get through that. I mean, Auburn has looked like a shell of itself in these last few weeks of the season. And then UMass and Georgia Tech, really murderer's row right there. But, I mean, this was the game. Like you said, if you get through this one, you take a deep breath, you go into your bye week, and you saddle up for two big games back-to-back, and you win those two, and you're pretty much done with your season. You're there. All of a sudden, it opens the door for so many other teams to get back in the race.
Yeah, and I mean another huge game, playoff implications, basically an elimination game, Oregon to Washington. And this is another big what if, Oregon's perspective.
Yeah.
Of course, winning this game in overtime, I mean, gifted. Certainly Washington had a 37-yarder to win it, but we're talking about, the absolute collapse and heartbreak against Stanford aside. We're talking about an undefeated Oregon team with some huge Pac-12 wins and a great opportunity to charge ahead into the playoff. As it is, they still only have one loss, and I mean, stranger things have happened certainly, but boy, the way that they have played in response to that loss just really makes me wonder, what could have been if just any one of a number of things had broken just a little better in their direction in that Stanford game.
I mean, kneel the ball and you're undefeated. Probably in the playoff race, maybe even ahead of Notre Dame at this point in the rankings. Like, that's all it is. It's a kneel down away from that. As unlucky as they got in the Stanford game, I'd say they got equally lucky in the Washington win. I mean, you saw the right before the timeout, the kicker nailed the 37-yarder like it was nothing. Plenty of leg right down the middle, and then gets a second chance at it and just pushes it right. At the end of the day, Oregon's defense stood up when it needed to, and again, the offense has been really good, both in the air and on the ground. They are getting back to that fun style of football that Oregon used to play. I don't think they're as quick or as pace-oriented, but they're certainly a lot of fun to watch, and they're more fun, I think, when their defense actually plays well, which they did in this game. And then for Washington, it's just year 12 of disappointment from Jake Browning. How many times can this guy have so much hype around this team and himself and then, fall flat in the big game?
Yeah, and just looking at the scoreboard or the stat sheet, you might not think that this was an otherworldly offensive performance from Oregon, but you also have to take into account this is the first team to score 24 points against Washington this year. Mm-hmm. And then to tack on another touchdown in the extra period, CJ Brudell has just become not only a dynamic player, but an absolute workhorse. Carried the ball 29 times in this game, obviously including the game-winning touchdown in overtime. Again, I mean, Justin Herbert did just enough to outplay Jake Browning, made fewer mistakes. I don't think either quarterback had too great of a game based on what we know about them, and I think a lot of that can be attributed to how good Washington's defense, particularly its secondary, is. But, I mean, absolutely huge win for Oregon, and for Mario Cristobal, elevated from within after Willie Taggart went. Those two men's careers have divulged wildly since that moment. So, I mean, he's got to be riding a wave still. And, I mean, this is huge for Oregon, huge blowout losses the last 2 years to Washington by a combined score of something like 108-24. So this is a big win for them.
Yeah, at the end of the day, I think they were the better team for a majority of the game. They just, the scoreboard didn't indicate it, and then all of a sudden they take advantage of a missed field goal and end up playing better in the overtime period. But yeah, if this game's on the road, they don't win. It's all sorts of factors had to come into play for them to get it just right. But they got the win, and all of a sudden are back alive.
Yeah, and finally, Michigan putting a beatdown on Wisconsin. Alex Hornibrook has been he's been a punchline for a while, but I think Saturday he really found a way to find a new low for even himself.
7 completed passes is just one of the most ridiculous things I've ever read. I don't know how he broke 100, or I don't know how he got. He got 100 total yards passing. So bad. And his 2 interceptions were some of the worst I've ever seen. He probably should have thrown 3 or 4, actually. But Michigan's defense played better. Michigan's offense was infinitely better. I knew Shea Patterson was the better quarterback. I think I mentioned it last week. I thought that Jonathan Taylor would be able to do a little more against Michigan, but I also thought that Hornibrook would be capable, competent, whatever word you want to use, and he simply was not.
Yeah, if Karen Higdon gains 20 more yards on the ground, both teams would have had running backs who ran for more yards than the quarterbacks threw. Jonathan Taylor beat Hornibrook by a yard. But even on top of the 7 completions for Alex Hornibrook, at one point in this game, he threw 12 straight incompletions.
Yeah,
which is absolutely unheard of for not even just a quarterback of a good football team, a ranked football team, any Power 5 team. Even Rutger isn't going to trot somebody out who does that. Probably by that point, they just won't even end up throwing the ball 12 total times, but still.
That's what we saw this weekend.
Yeah.
They were 2 of 17 passing with 5 interceptions. And 8 yards.
There's just looking back on it, every year since, and Wisconsin keeps trotting out these seemingly worse and worse quarterbacks. Like the marriage of Russell Wilson and Wisconsin is just so puzzling to look back on, because just they have not had a quarterback seemingly before or after him who has looked confident, and he was an absolutely dynamic player when he was there, just seemingly so out of place. But I mean, they're going to keep shouting out Hornibrook. I'm going to assume like nothing ever happened, and we are in for a lot more stinkers in the Big Ten West.
Yeah, this game, it was close for a little bit. Like, I wouldn't even say it was that close in the entire first half. It was definitely close in the first quarter. And then Michigan seemed to just show the better prowess on offense, even though they kept getting held to field goals. And then all of a sudden, Harbaugh's team just let loose. And it was a bloodbath from then on. I don't know how, if you're Paul Chryst, you go back with Hornibrook, other than the fact that you just simply don't have anyone that seems better. But that's hard to believe because he's just so bad. He is probably bottom 3 Power 5 quarterbacks. You can't can't say he's the worst because Rutgers has the worst. That's a given. I think even Kansas has a better quarterback, I think.
I mean, they've had good play out of the quarterback position at certain points of the year, but yeah, I mean, it's never a net positive. Like, the head-to-head matchup, not that it's really necessarily an official thing in football, but like I don't think that's ever really something that Wisconsin has won.
No.
It's always just been kind of treading water, trying to just not make mistakes rather than, doing things to help the team win.
LSU North.
Yeah, basically, not Rutgers, but Wisconsin.
Right.
So with those upsets, you also had Penn State losing again in the last minute to Michigan State, and West Virginia just laying an absolute egg at Ohio State. What are your playoff rankings looking like right now?
Bama obviously stays number 1. I'm going to put Ohio State at 2, Clemson's 3, Notre Dame 4, and then UCF 5 and LSU at 6.
I've got the same, except you just have Notre Dame 1 ahead of Clemson. At this point, let's talk about Clemson right now. They're hosting NC State, the 16th in the country. Biggest what if, or one of the bigger what ifs in college football this year is NC State versus West Virginia, the game that never was, would have very much bolstered somebody's playoff hopes. Could have been West Virginia's first loss, and this Iowa State game doesn't even matter, or we could be saying the same on NC State. Either way, though, Clemson 17-point favorites in this one seems a bit excessive, knowing what we know about Ryan Finley. But it is at Clemson. Who are you taking here?
I'm going to take Clemson. I don't think they'll cover, which I'll get to in the Spread Option podcast later this week. You should check it out. But I'll take Clemson, the home field advantage, plus the defense, I think, gives them the advantage. I don't know that North Carolina State's got a necessarily good run defense. They do keep these games close and low scoring, but I don't see them being able to outlast Clemson as much as I think Ryan Finley's a good quarterback.
Yeah, I definitely think NC State has overachieved this year considering how much they lost to the NFL. Primarily skill position players on offense, and then, of course, Bradley Chubb, anchor of that extremely talented defensive line from a year ago. But
Nyheim Hines, if he's here, this is a totally different game.
But I do think Ryan Finley is that talented of a quarterback to come in. It's a day game at Clemson. We won't have quite the same intimidating atmosphere. This is still, a top 6 passing offense in America. A lot of that has to do with Finley, but he's not without help. And then, this Clemson team doesn't really have the aura around it that others have. They seem the most vulnerable out of the perceived top 4, which is ironic because Georgia's already actually lost a game. But seeing how Syracuse was very nearly able to steal a game on the road with or without the injury to Trevor Lawrence, I think NC State can put up even more of a fight, and I think that there's gonna be some craziness that happens here that will allow the Wolfpack to sneak out of there with an upset win.
Wow, I agree with you on the main points that this Clemson team doesn't seem like it's capable of really taking care of blowing out teams. That being said, I'm sure in the next 2 or 3 weeks they'll just absolutely blow the doors off of someone. But they are legitimately one play away from going down to their 3rd-string quarterback. Like, it is that tight, and all of a sudden you become fairly one-dimensional. So I do agree, but I think Clemson's just got a good enough defense to make, to overcome any deficiencies the offense may or may not have.
Yeah. Travis Etienne is having a phenomenal season, and I'm sure he will make me eat my words on Saturday. But gotta believe that Ryan Finley is going to make it happen. I need to shake things up a little bit to make up some ground in the standings.
There you go.
We've got number 22 Mississippi State, number 5 LSU. Is this going to be another letdown game for LSU?
I just don't even know why I answer these anymore. I've been on the wrong side of LSU essentially every week but Miami. So I'm going to say LSU wins. It feels like an emotional letdown in a look-ahead game. However, they are the home team, I think. I got to double-check this.
Yeah, they are.
Yes, they are the home team. I don't think Mississippi State has a good offense, despite the fact that Nick Fitzgerald is there. I'm going to go LSU in a close, very bad game. Something similar to the Mississippi State-Florida game that we saw earlier this year.
Well, that's the thing. Like, the last 3 games for Mississippi State, they're churning out a mighty 12 points a game.
Mm-hmm.
Or no, I did that math wrong. They're churning out 13 points a game. But that includes a 23-point performance against the likes of Auburn. Got a win last week. And then
someone call it an outburst.
Yeah, I mean, for them, honestly. And then losses to Kentucky and Florida back-to-back games prior. Not that those are bad losses, but for a team that wants to be a top 25 team and taken seriously nationally, that's a rather rough look for them. But it is pretty much all on Nick Fitzgerald. Like, he gets absolutely zero offensive help. It seems like leading passer, obviously, also the leading rusher, and I was wrong, excuse me. They've scored 36 points in the last 3 weeks. I had to fact check myself. But there is one player on Mississippi State who averages greater than 2 catches per game. He has 13 catches in 6 games. Osiris Mitchell. There is nothing even resembling a go-to target for Nick Fitzgerald. So that's a big part of why his passing numbers have been down, because if you just look at what he's been doing this year through the air, completely devoid of context, you're like, wow, this guy's having a very shitty year, especially what he's been able to do in the past. But like, there's no surprise what Mississippi State's going to throw at you on offense. I think LSU is going to be, they should be licking their chops. Fitzgerald is obviously one of the better quarterbacks that they're going to see this year, but Mississippi State has just not been able to surround him with guys that can make that offense successful, and takes a lot of the pressure off of Joe Burrow and that LSU offense, where they can really just control the clock, get chunk plays on the ground, and ultimately win this game like 21-6.
Yeah, Nick Fitzgerald has not thrown for 100 yards in the last 2 weeks. So, they're just going to run the ball as many times as they possibly can. And typically, I don't think you're going to beat an LSU defense just running the ball time and time again.
No, although he did break Tebow's SEC rushing record by quarterback last week, so that's something. But
yes, it is.
Like you said, kind of turning into a one-trick pony at this point. Maybe a little different if they were at home, but Death Valley, I really don't see
at night
things going their way. Yeah, that's not a great recipe for success.
Mm-mm.
We've got Michigan at Michigan State, both coming off huge victories. Michigan, we mentioned, over Wisconsin. Michigan State over Penn State, which really opens up the Big Ten East for Michigan to really make a run at Ohio State. Don't really have to worry about Penn State anymore. Who you liking here?
I'm going to go Michigan. As much as I don't like it, I still don't think that Michigan State is a good football team. Penn State has just sucked this year, plain and simple. They just have not played well. McSorley has been less than stellar, and he is the reason they haven't succeeded as they should have. Miles Sanders has been a revelation in the backfield, and when you're replacing a guy like Saquon Barkley that easily could have gone number 1 overall and ended up going number 2, and you get a guy like Sanders, you should be thanking the football gods or whoever you believe in, because that's an absolute coup and just a huge, huge helping piece for what should have been one of, if not the best quarterbacks in the conference. And here he is, can't find ways to win against Michigan State. So Michigan is my pick. I actually think Shea Patterson has shown drastic improvement from week 1, and the offense is playing better. They're not great, but they're playing better. But the defense is flying around, forcing turnovers and making huge plays.
I mean, honestly, I think Brian Lewerke is the best quarterback in this game.
Yes, I agree with you.
Really helps having a weapon downfield like Felton Davis, who has got to be in his 8th college season at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Huge game, over 100 yards, 2 touchdowns, including the game winner against Penn State last week. And I think he's really going to create challenges for Michigan downfield, because as good as their defense is, it is primarily in that front 7. And the secondary is not quite as talented. Still very good, but susceptible to giving up the big play from, the right person. And I think Felton Davis will have a good game going down the seam and ripping off 20 yards or more per play. And I mean, like I said, Lewerke is a better passer than Shea Patterson, at least in the offenses that they play in. We've talked at length about Michigan and Harbaugh kind of neutering their quarterbacks. Patterson's really been victimized by that, and Lewerke has a lot more freedom in what Mark D'Antonio lets his offenses do. I think being in East Lansing will be big. It's not going to be, a huge advantage, because Michigan is still going to travel extremely well, but I think Michigan State pulls off the upset at home here.
Yeah, I just can't pick a team that loses to Northwestern. I can't do it.
Northwestern they've got the edge. They're in Michigan State's heads at this point.
They are.
We'll see. Finally, we got number 12 Oregon, number 25 Washington State. Game day finally going to Pullman. But the way Oregon's playing, is Washington State going to be feeling particularly good at the end of this one?
They will not. Oregon will win the game. There's not much else to it. Washington State's going to throw the ball all over the yard, as they do all the time with Mike Leach. Gardner Minshew, the quarterback, he's the second. He's got a pretty good arm, but so does pretty much every quarterback that Washington State has. They can pick and pull whoever they've got and let them throw the ball. Other than that, though, they don't have much of a defense. Oregon, this probably turns into a bit of a shootout, I think, with Oregon pulling away. Oregon's got the better of the two defenses by and far. Home field might play a difference in the first half, but I think Ducks win by at least a score. 7 points is what I mean there.
Yeah, that's fair. Gardner Minshew is just a 10 out of 10 man.
Yeah. Mike Leach name too.
That's a college golf name. What that is. Not shocking at all. Washington State, again, number 1 passing offense in the country in terms of yardage. But Oregon, I don't see them losing this game. Worth mentioning, honestly, like we did with Oregon, Washington State's one of those teams just one heartbreaking loss away from being undefeated right now. It's a narrow 3-point loss at USC, gave up a late touchdown and had a game-time field goal blocked. They have been very quiet over there on the West Coast, but I mean, we are not far away from talking about this as an undefeated team right now. That being said, Oregon has a lot more talent throughout the roster. I mean, Mike Leach is obviously well versed at doing more with less. That's a big part of his offensive philosophy being the way that it is, because that allows not necessarily more talented players to win every time. But I mean, the way CJ Verdell's been playing, I think Justin Herbert is really going to appreciate going up against Washington State's defense after just having to deal with Washington. I think he'll put up much bigger numbers than he has the last couple weeks, and I think Oregon will win this one on the road.
Yeah, and it's worth noting too that people were talking about this year as a rebuilding year for Washington State. They lose Luke Falk to the NFL, tragically lose their backup quarterback in a suicide, and I mean, their whole team was pretty much gone from last year that contended in the Pac-12, and all of a sudden they're 5-1 again.
Yeah, I mean, Mike Leach doesn't rebuild; he just retools.
Exactly.
But yeah, it's starting to become a clear playoff picture. Right as we feel like the top four is settled in, these high upset weeks start to happen, and I mean they'll only continue to happen throughout the end of the season. I mean, UCF, as much as I hate to say it, they very easily could go undefeated again and still come nowhere close to the playoff. There are already many of those, let's call them haters, on the Twitters and the internets already looking at the strength of schedule. So not a great look. Some would say it's a bad visual, but I'm just ready for the powers that be ahead of them to start racking up L's, so can finally at least get UCF in the playoff this year, because I mean the world needs it.
Don't forget the playoff committee lied to us and told us that UCF has a path to the playoff.
Yeah. Well, like a path to consideration was almost how they phrased it. But honestly, this is kind of me spin zoning future me's depression. But if UCF goes undefeated and is left out again, I mean, I think that's a pretty clear argument in favor of expanding the playoff. Yeah, to at least 8 teams, which I mean, it should have been from the very beginning. Going from 2 to 4 is not really creating a playoff; it's creating an extra game.
It's really just creating a problem. If you just go to 8, you can keep your Power 5 schools happy by having them all play a conference championship, making it matter, giving an automatic bid, and then getting 3 at-larges after that. Like it's so simple. It's so simple. But the NCAA does these schools, this fucking organization, I don't even know what else to say, doesn't get it.
Yeah, I mean, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Yeah, so basically UCF are bust this year, and I know now they're going to lose some stupid-ass game. I don't even know who's on the rest of their schedule, but
just give the fans what they want, the Notre Dame UCF national title.
Oh, God, I would not like that at all. Honestly, like a UCF Auburn type game. Like, let me UCF Ohio State. I'd watch the shit out of that game.
The haters would have no idea what to do because pretty much everyone that hates Notre Dame also hates UCF.
Yeah. I would want them both to win. But, yeah, the schedule is, I mean, obviously losing to someone like East Carolina or Navy would be absolutely killer. But
Cincinnati and South Florida.
They do finish the season with 2 ranked opponents, and I know that would probably cause a lot of people to roll their eyes. But it is what it is. I mean, that is as good a schedule as you can hope for from a group of 5 team. North Carolina washed out game kind of hurts. Not that North Carolina is good, but they are a Power 5 team. That might have helped bring some more legitimacy, but either way, gonna be pulling hard for Central Florida till the end of the year.
As the premier Central Florida podcast, that's what we do.
Yeah, that is all we can. Just hope and pray. We'll be back next week with more for you, and right around the corner, the start of our college basketball coverage. I'll be getting back into the blog game at long last. On top of that, but obviously on this podcast too, we will start delving deep into the world of arguably the greatest sport in human history. So keep on listening and get excited for that.